Okay, so now let's talk about routing. So every MVC framework has a routing file that determines how the URL structure should be analyzed and which controller and which method within the controller should handle the different URL. So the URL structure plays a key role in MVC framework. So I'm at the test 1 project that I created. Let me open up Sublime. The routing file exists in config routes.rb. It's a Ruby file. So when I did scaffolding, it automatically created a routing instruction for post. And it just put resources, and by putting resources, it uses what's called a restful route, restful architecture for the post. So restful routes basically mean that their resource can be organized. A URL can be used to tell that resource to do different things. So let me pull this browser, and this is one topic that could easily overwhelm you. This documentation over here, Ruby on Rails guides, routing guides, is really good, but it has tons and tons of information. And one caution that I would have for you is use this as a resource to help you do things, but do not let this overwhelm you. You probably won't be using every single one of these functions over here. Just utilize the fundamental topics that we think you need to know, and then if you cannot do something with what we teach you, then you can look up that documentation. So let's talk about restful routes just a little bit more. So when we put something in the routes.ruby file as resources, for example photos or posts, it automatically assumes the following URL structure. So it creates 7 different actions. Photos. So let's say we are creating photos controller and photos model. Photos, this is where we display all the different photos. So if someone goes to the site /photos, is supposed to display all the list of photos. On the same side, if someone posted information to photos, that means they want to create a new photo. Photos new, that URL should display an HTML form where user can create a new photo. Photos / the ID number is supposed to show information for that specific photo ID. Photos ID edit, that should display the HTML form for editing a photo. Photos / ID, if some information is posted, in this case it's actually put, but it's basically just posting it to photos ID with hidden action put. So it's really posting it. That means the user wants to update some information, and you will have more exposure to this. If they post information to photos ID with action delete, that means they want to delete a specific photo. So a lot you can see, I mean, with web application, whenever you create a resource, these are the pretty common things that you need to do. So if that's the case, then you basically use a restful route, and you tell in the routing, you basically say, hey, for the post model and controller, I am going to be using all of the restful routes, so I'm just gonna say that's a resource. Okay, so that's basically restful routes, and get familiar with these, and as you create different forms and different view files for each of these URL, you will get more familiar with this. There are non-restful routes that you can do. You can, for example, specify the URL and specify the name of the controller and the method. You can even specify the different HTTP verb, so that's supposed to accept both get and post. You can read a little bit more in the documentation, so you can read about match commands, adds, You can even have it redirect within the routes.rb file. Route to, that's the default controller and the method that should handle requests to the main site. Within the RESTful architecture, you can also change a few things. As you go through the documentation, make sure you know how to use as, path names, only, and except. So let's say you don't want to use all 7 of these RESTful routes, and you only want to specify that it should only use, for example, index or create. Then you can use only or except functions to include or exclude certain actions that are available through the standard RESTful routes. Go through nesting. If you wanted to, for example, allow people to edit comments for post, and you want people to access that by going to like localhost, let's say post 1 and then comments 2. If you want to, so in this way comments is just part of the post resource, is included, then you can use nesting and put resource as another as part of another resource. If you need more than 7 routes that RESTful routing provides, then you can use member routes. Member means you need to pass a specific ID. Collection means you're dealing with things that are not at an individual level, but at a group level. So preview, if you're using preview, you probably will be passing the individual ID of the resource that you want to get a preview on. Search, you're not passing an individual ID. It's just a group function. So that's what collections are, that's what members are. And you can also Google things to get more information. So again, this routing.html has tons of stuff with basically everything that you would ever have to do for routes. It's a lot of stuff. Don't get overwhelmed. Just focus on the things that we tell you that you need to focus on for now, and later you can come back and add more things if you want to do some fancy stuff. But all of these things that we outline over here, that should be enough to get you started. So now, having said that, there is another cool command that you can do. So if I do rake routes, this will display all of the URL that is available through my web application. So this looks very much like this context that I had on our wiki. The powerful thing is I can later in my view file call these specific pages by putting things like post path, new post path, edit post path, post path, and that can become very useful in the view. So later you will have experience using the path functions in the view. But the rake routes is just a really nice, it just displays summary of all the URLs that's available in your application, and the controller and the method that handles it. Right now this doesn't look very complicated because I just have a single post controller, but if my application was getting really complicated and for some reason certain URL doesn't work, I can always do rake routes and have it display all of the different URLs that are available, and I can see if that makes sense. If I kind of forget, oh, is it post path or is it post path, edit post, new post, and what, exactly what method handles that URL request, you can just do rake routes and it will give you a summary. So that could save you time in troubleshooting. Okay, so go through these exercises, create few different resources, create few different controllers and methods, which you will learn in the next tab, and play around with the routes.ruby file, but don't get too crazy. Just focus on the fundamentals first, and later you will be able to do some of the more fancy stuff that the Rails offers through their routing file. Okay? Alright, thanks.